Conversations across time. 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 Conversations across time.
Hi, my name's Mark Hoffman. The show you're about to see, I'll be portraying Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. Also on the panel with me for this show will be the distinguished poet Elizabeth Barrett-Browning and another distinguished poet and rap artist, Tupac Shakur. The show deals with the issues of morality and spirituality. The show will be hosted by Ms. Vivian Crawford with her co-host, Babette Joseph.
Good evening, and welcome once again to Conversations Across Time, the television show that allows you, the viewer, to experience and witness imaginary conversations amongst immortals, historical figures that really are just so profound in their thoughts, but we want them to interact with each other, and we imagine what it would be like if we got these powerful people together to have a conversation across time. To my right is, of course, my co-host and friend, former State Representative Babette Josephs. Good evening, Babette.
Good evening, Vivian.
And seated next to Representative Josephs is Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Please refer to me in the future as Justice Holmes.
Please, I beg your pardon, Justice Holmes. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes served on the Supreme Court from 1902 to 1932. You were appointed by President Theodore Roosevelt. You wrote over 873 opinions, which is still a record for the Supreme Court, any jurist writing that many opinions. We'll get later to why you were such a prolific writer. Seated next to Justice Holmes is Elizabeth Barrett-Browning. Elizabeth Barrett-Browning is perhaps well known for her love poems. However, Elizabeth Barrett-Browning was someone who was against slavery. She was born in 1806, and she was someone who also had profound things to say about child labor and social issues. So she's considered a spiritual poet and someone that is held in high esteem today. Good evening.
Good evening. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you for joining us. And I am going to ask, we're going to change a little bit tonight. I'm going to ask if you would introduce our next guest.
It would be my pleasure. I'd like to start by just reading something. And today is filled with anger, fueled with hidden hate, scared of being outcast, afraid of common fate. Today is built on tragedies which no one wants to face, nightmares to humanity, and morally disgraced. Tonight is filled with rage, violence in the air. Children bred with ruthlessness, cause no one at home cares. Your other esteemed guest is no other than Tupac Shakur.
Good evening, Mr. Shakur.
Good evening, Ms. Crawford. You want me to read her poem now? The runaway slave at Pilgrim's Point. This is an excerpt, right? This ain't the whole thing. At Pilgrim's Point. I look on the sea and the sky where the pilgrim's ships first anchored lay. The free sun rideth gloriously, but the pilgrim's ghosts have slid away. Through the earliest streaks of the morn, my face is black but glares with a scorn which they dare not meet by day. That's you, right? Elizabeth Barrett-Browning.
Yes, sir.
Those two poems were wonderful. My father, who was a poet, would have appreciated both of your works, and especially Miss Browning, because he dedicated his first issue of the Atlantic Monthly to this esteemed lady.
Yes, he did.
That's
He's a
wonderful.
lovely man.
And for our audience, we pride ourselves at Conversations Across Time in pairing people that one would never imagine having a conversation. And what's interesting about it is that certainly with Mr. Shakur and Miss Browning, that they have so much in common that the audience would not know. First, they both loved Shakespeare. Both studied Shakespeare and were able to explain Shakespeare in a way that most people didn't grasp. Obviously, they're both poets, and they both embraced the teachings of Voltaire. Common within Voltaire's teachings is that a bridge can be constructed to allow the free interchange and interaction of all men based on equality. That there was a commonality amongst all men.
Amen.
And they used their poetry as commentary on governmental policies. They were both very spiritual. So tonight, we want to delve a little more into the writings and the understandings of both Miss Elizabeth Barrett-Browning and Tupac Shakur. And that being said, we have with us Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, because Justice Holmes, you wrote so many opinions and were such a prolific writer, but history has treated you very kindly. And I say that because in studying your actual writings, one case actually does stick out to me, and that's the Nixon versus Herndon case. That was a case that you decided in 1920. You wrote the opinion in 1927. Now, for our audience to understand, Al Nixon was an El Paso physician, an African American who had been precluded from voting in the Democratic primary in Texas. In 1827, Justice Holmes, you wrote for the majority, and you stated, and I quote, "States have the right to limit the exercise of the vote of its citizens, but such limit could not be set upon the basis of color." Now, what's interesting about that is the argument, and sometimes I know I get too far into the law because as Babby and I are both lawyers, but the 14th Amendment is the basis under which you decided that case.
Absolutely.
14th Amendment involving due process, that in fact there should be nothing to abridge upon the rights of the citizenry and that due process of the law should allow equal protection for all of its citizens. However, the 15th Amendment, which is also what was argued before you, has to do with the fact that the state should not impose or allow any infraction against African Americans. But you sidestepped it and based your opinion on the 14th Amendment. Because the reality is, by basing your decision on the 14th Amendment, on the 14th Amendment, what you effectively did was tell the states how they could get around allowing the citizenry to vote. And they could preclude African Americans from voting.
That was not the intent of my opinion on that case. My intent was to give equal protection of the law to an African American citizen. If the states chose to use the 15th Amendment and to institute in their Democratic or Republican primary, of course in Texas there were no Republicans in that time. If they chose to do that, that is true, Ms. Babette. But if they chose to use their own power in having all-way primaries, that case was never challenged again before the court, and I don't know how I would have ruled on it. So
Hold on, homie. Hold on. You got to know that's bullshit, right? Okay, I'm sorry. I know
I
know
be
you're a
able to-
justice and everything. I apologize.
Thank you, sir.
Justice.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I can't say justice with a straight face. I'm sorry. Okay, so listen. All right, Justice Holmes. I didn't read all of your opinions, but I have some time. I read some of it. Man, you can't possibly really think that with the benefit of time, what you were saying then was actually going to result in a net benefit for the people who were most vulnerable. You can't possibly believe that because you can read.
But my philosophy of the law and of politics is what would be to the overall good and what would evolve. And down the road, if it were so evolutionary that they would allow black men to vote in their primary, that would happen.
That's not how the law works, though. You and I both know that how law actually works is there's one set of people who is really protected, and then there's another set of people who, depending on what century it is,
right? Who need to be protected.
Absolutely.
But they're not.
Yeah. Representative
What?
Joseph, she all right. Well, go ahead.
Our job is not because it is impossible to determine who to be protected and who's not to be protected. Our job is to see the evolution of the law. And in this case, I ruled in favor of the black voter. If the state of Texas chose to
You ruled in
interpret
favor
that
of
ruling
one.
and use not use the 15th Amendment and make all-white primaries, that was the Democratic Party in the state of Texas right.
Now, see this right here. This is exactly why, and I don't blame you for not saying anything because you're about to put your foot in your mouth. This right here.
I beg your pardon.
I'm not saying that because you're a woman. I'm saying it because if
She's
you
a great poet. She never put her foot
I
in
do
her mouth.
not defend. First of all,
I'm sorry. You know what? That's my fault, and I apologize. I'm
I
looking
might
at.
have to put you in the same
I'm looking at your
category.
face. I'm looking at your face, and as I'm looking at your face, I can't help imagine that you must be very shocked to be sitting at tables with two black people at the same time.
Absolutely not.
All right.
I think your assumptive behavior is a bit, it takes me back.
So when was the last time you
you
sat at a table with a black man in public,
Last week.
And
other than Frederick Douglass?
She's a great poetess. When you are
Sweetheart,
a
let me
poetess like Elizabeth
I'm
Barrett-Browning,
sorry, baby. I'm just
Thank
playing.
you.
I'm
No,
sorry,
no,
baby. I'm
that's-
just playing.
That's quite all right, baby.
because actually, Elizabeth Barrett-Browning, which is why we invited her here tonight, is a fan of yours.
Perhaps you should learn a bit about me,
Well,
as I have about you.
believes in an egalitarian society and wrote about it and tried to use her writing to make those changes,
Okay,
like
Let me put it
yourself.
to you this way. I would have a love affair with this man's intellect. However,
That's some. Do
y'all
have the technology for that?
However, I find him to be emotionally repugnant
And morally
and morally repugnant.
repugnant.
Young lady, I was just going to defend you.
I need no
Wait,
defense
young lady.
from you.
It's Elizabeth Barrett-Browning you're calling young lady.
You were a heroine of my dear father.
And your father
And
and
my
you
father-
are entirely different people, aren't you?
But I was going to tell him that you
I don't
probably are 1/6 African American yourself. You probably were at tables with black people most of your life.
Well, now we all know that if you shake enough family trees of white people, there's a good chance a nigga gonna fall out.
Now, I want to say something to you about
Neanderthal.
but I want to throw something out about that because it's interesting that you bring that up, Mr. Shakur. First of all, one of the things that's so interesting about your background is that your father was a slaveholder. And what it must have taken for you as a young woman to step out and be against the class that you were born into. That's the one thing. But what I find interesting is that your father, and you had sisters, your father did not want any of his children to have children.
Yes.
Now, given that, and we all know the myth of the recessive gene, as Justice Holmes alludes to, and that is that there's a strong possibility that close to you in lineage was someone who had been a slave.
Absolutely.
And so I personally applaud the fact that you could reach the intellectual depth that you did to be anti-slavery when you grew up in a household of someone who was a slave
had
owner.
a child.
And you had a child.
Man, how is it intellectual
It
depth?
wasn't a matter of intellectualism. It was how I was created. It was something that was, it didn't matter how I was raised. It was how I was created. This was something that was inside me from the beginning.
Oh,
Now,
Dare you?
And I hear
Poetry.
I hear Mr. Shakur finding that
Mocking.
amusing.
Yeah.
And what I want to do is,
Because
we
that's
have to take a
ignorance.
break, and after that break, we will come back and indeed explore precisely what it is
that is inside Miss Browning.
that not so much what's inside of her. I think what we will explore is why you, as a fellow artist, find that humorous. Please come back. Thank you.
Thank you.
This episode, I portrayed Tupac, which was quite an experience. But let's say you start with the popular perception of Tupac as black and dangerous. It's not inauthentic, but there's no dimension there. So you get another dimension of Tupac as this thoughtful, introspective artist, which is not false, especially if you get the chance to read any of Tupac's published poetry or unpublished poetry, which I highly recommend that you do read. He, in his short life, clearly had a sense of purpose. And that's really what ultimately grounded me in trying to do the best that I could with trying to convey the essence of this human being, was just the sense of purpose. Everything else was kind of just like slapping stuff on it. I tried not to make it too heavy-handed. I just tried to stick with the sense of purpose, of changing the world, fundamentally making the world a better place, a freer place, a more just place, which I think is the core of Tupac anyway, honestly.
And before the break, Mr. Shakur, there was I believe you had a reaction to something that Ms. Browning said about what was her spirituality regarding slavery. And I just wanted us to illuminate that, because she was someone that the abolitionists reached out to write upon, because she was so well respected and so anti-slavery. So, but please enumerate.
First off, I don't think I was talking about spirituality, but I'm gonna leave that alone for right now. So it's cool to write. Writing is one of the ways in which people can get their ideas out and push them forward. But it's important to remember that you can't really separate the writing from the writer, right? Because if you look at my history, right? Now you look at what Elizabeth just read of mine. That's not what people remember me for. That's not what anybody is thinking about, except for people who really, really dug deep enough to actually understand. And that's really what this is about, right? So if you want to take a look, okay, runaway slave at Pilgrim's Point. Okay, cool, that's fine. You can write abolitionist poetry. You can write poems about love, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you still can't separate the writing from the writer. So therefore, okay, this woman is an abolitionist. That doesn't stop her from benefiting from black labor. She didn't go back and pay all them people their back wages. Now, does that mean that? Well, hang on, Mom. I'm not trying to throw you under the bus. Now, listen. Does that mean that the writing is false suddenly? No, obviously, because we can all have our sincerely held opinions and express them. Okay, so you made some beautiful writing. I'm not trying to separate from that, but at the same time, I don't want us to get lost and think that.
I don't believe that what I spoke of was my writing. I believe what I said was that it was how I was born. Abolitionist writing, you've not done enough research on me. I'm generations before you. I come from a place of truth and know I am not disingenuous in any way. No,
it's
you
not
cannot
about you
separate.
It's not about you being disingenuous. You're taking this. Hold on a second. You're taking this real personal right now. You're taking this real personal right now.
I'm taking it real personal because from the time that we sat, and I respectfully read your poetry, maybe not in the way that you would have wanted it to be read, but I did my research. And I respect you as a poet. I respect you as a man. I'm saying somewhere along the line, you have misjudged me.
This has nothing to do with me misjudging you. This isn't even about you.
This has everything to do.
But this is not about you.
I don't know what you're arguing about.
Here's the thing that
he's being a man.
This is exactly okay. Now hang on a second. I'm gonna tell you why. You want to let me tell you, or you want to tell me why?
I think you should let the lady speak.
I think you're both the same. I think you both see a much more egalitarian society, unlike the justice here, who pinned various opinions on different sides of the same issue in order to satisfy his personal bias. That if you both had a personal bias, it was towards making people more equal, helping them to reach their potentials, and hopefully we have a better society.
Man, you must be a hell of a lawyer, because that has nothing to do with what I was just talking about, and you managed to ask me a question, and offhandedly insult my intelligence, and change the subject all at the same time. You's a bad motherfucker. So look here.
Brilliant, darling, brilliant.
I like that, thank you.
So look here. What I'm saying is, first off, we not fighting. That's the main thing that you got to understand. I have not said an unkind word about Elizabeth Barrett-Browning. What I said was that you cannot separate the writing from the writer, and that ultimately, despite the thoughts of abolition, which are meaningful and significant, because that's the only way that society gets pushed forward, by people taking action, and writing does count as an action. Sure. I'll let you finish. Now wait a second.
Am I speaking?
You moved your hands into the...
I postured myself.
You posturing? That's not the first time you started in this program posturing. So listen, what I'm saying is that it's not about any kind of cruelty or attack on Elizabeth Barrett-Browning. First off, let me clarify. You're a hell of a poet, okay? I read it. It's great work. That's not the point. You're an artist. An artist does what an artist does. You acted upon your consciousness. I'm not trying to.
I am more than an artist, sir.
We all are. You're a human being first, but let's focus on.
Exactly.
Let me focus on.
You attacked my humanity.
I'm not attacking your humanity. What you're doing you are doing what white women love to do in this society, which is as soon as.
Who in the hell do you think you are?
She introduced me. Didn't you read the poem? It says Tupac Shakur at the bottom.
I thought I knew the heart of this man, and I was obviously wrong.
You don't know the heart of anything until you know your own heart. And if you can't recognize, if you can't recognize that all I'm currently doing is creating context.
Talking about what you're currently doing, I'm saying you said you did not insult me. You indeed insulted me from the get-go.
I want to give before we get too far, because we have so much to cover. I want, Mr. Shakur, I'd like you to finish your thought, because there was an explanation, and I understand you're from a different time, and so we need to at least hear what it is that you were saying.
I would love to tell you what I was saying, but it seems like every time I explain my point, somebody has interrupted me. So
no, we're going to let you explain your point. And
all right, so we can move on.
Yes,
I can do. All right, cool.
Okay.
So all I'm saying is, again, you cannot separate the writing from the writer, and therefore that while the thoughts on the page are surely coming from a well-intentioned place, to separate them from the very real benefit that you derive from these people who your family exploited is to miss ultimately the point. Because while your writing is spectacular, especially your love poetry, which I have referred to on many a night, you cannot then say that you are somehow above slavery when you lived in a society that was built upon it. You can say that you worked against it, certainly, that's valid.
I can say much more than that. May I? I hated it. I hated every moment of it. From the time I was a child, I was a learned child. I read, I am self-taught. I read everything possible in several languages. I understand. I come from a place of understanding.
How you gonna understand when you got a governess reading to you?
For a second, sir, so that we can come and meet on the same plateau, because I know there is a place, and that's why there's anger here. Okay? Let me finish, please. As a gentleman,
this is not
that
me
I
angry.
trust you are. Okay. See, your mockery is...
I'm not mocking you, I'm just explaining this is not what I look like angry.
And you know what? This is not me being a writer that takes advantage of what my parents took advantage of. Not me. I left when I could get out. And before I got out, I did what I did and I wrote what I wrote.
I want to say this because I started off by saying that I really had admiration for the fact that you were able to stand up to a father who was domineering, who precluded you from having a social life.
Yes.
I mean, how long it took for you to be able to escape from that and to have the views that you had and express this notion of the commonality of mankind is something that you are to be applauded for. So I don't want us to go off in that direction, because the reason that you're both invited here is because, as Babette has alluded to, you two have much more in common and many more similarities than the public would recognize. But there's something that we've got, because we've got Justice Holmes here, and we really must get to some of the decisions that he made.
But let's talk about Justice Holmes for a minute. If you want to contextualize all of this.
Yes, please.
The ideas that I'm talking about regarding you operating from a place of privilege. It's not to, hang on. It's not to say that there's anything wrong about what you said. It's that you got to look at the context. It's the same way that you have to look at the context of Oliver Wendell Holmes. Now, I can tell you right now, you might say that I haven't done my research, but I know this. I know that when you enlisted in the Union Army, you were 20 years old, I think, something like that. You just finished the commencement at Harvard.
Now,
just context.
Now, I know this is a very heated discussion.
It's not heated. I'm chilling.
It's a heated conversation across time. And what happens is it's so heated that we're going to actually continue this conversation. And I'm going to ask that our viewers, I'm sure you're going to be interested in tuning in next week to hear the continuation of this conversation, but we're going to keep rolling. So what's happening right now is this is at the end of the first half of this discussion, but we need to come back, and we will do that. So we're going to stay here tonight and finish this heated conversation. Our guests, our audience will not be able to see it until the following week, but thank you so much. This has been Conversations Across Time. And in this instance, as Chef Trek likes to say, this has been controversy across time. Thank you so much.
Conversations across time, 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 conversations.